Alright, so you all have the summary and analysis section of your final project due on the 3rd. Okay, and so what I want to do with this video is explain to you what a summary and analysis is and how I expect you to approach this paper. Hopefully you've started working on it, but I know a lot of students put it off, and hopefully this will help you make sure that you are on the right track with that paper, okay? So for the summary and analysis, you need to select 3 articles that talk about your topic, so that are approaching your topic anthropologically or provide a lot of really solid information for you as a researcher in this capacity. And so then what you need to do is you need to read those articles, obviously, and for your summary and analysis you need to discuss what the author is talking about, the point of the research, and then you want to analyze it a little bit to kind of search for important information and if the information is relevant and the author's credentials and things like that. So this is going to be just a little bit of an intro into that process, and then I'll have some links for you as well so you can go and continue to read more about that. I've just found that we ask this of students a lot as instructors, but rarely teach them how to do it properly. And so this should give you a bit of an intro into that process. Why is this type of activity or assignment important for college students? And really the question is, why do we even assign these types of assignments? Basically, writing a summary analysis is really helpful and encouraging student comprehension of information they're reading. Okay, so you have to be able to understand the issue to write one of these. It also can help us judge your understanding of an issue, an idea, or a specific reading. Okay, so again, you have to understand it to write this. It requires critical thinking skills, so you have to be able to not only read the article and summarize it, but then think about it critically. Think about the author's qualifications. Think about how she built the argument and that sort of thing. Okay, so then we're often expecting you to do this without having been taught about summary analysis, and it is difficult to do. You're taking a lot of information and compiling it down, and that can be very difficult. And then it's also useful outside of academia. It's important for us as citizens of the world and as politically engaged citizens to be able to read or learn about an issue, be able to comprehend it, summarize it, but then also analyze it. So if you're watching the news or if you're reading an article, it's important to be able to summarize those issues, but then also look at the qualifications of the author or understand that Fox News is right-leaning or CNN is left-leaning, and to understand those things. So just as an example, we can use this type of process to understand political issues and issues that exist in our world outside of academia. So it's an important skill to have, and that's why we ask you to do these types of activities. So we'll start just with the summary section. What is the summary? Basically, a brief statement or account of the main points of something, and you're going to be getting rid of needless details or formalities. Okay, so when you're talking about an article or a research topic and you're trying to summarize it, you want to hit the main points, the biggest things that someone needs to know, and get rid of all of the details that aren't necessary to understanding the issue. Okay, the balance here is not the balance comes from trying to avoid oversimplifying the issue and getting rid of too many details. So what are the main points? How do you decide what's most important? Okay, this depends on the questions you're asking and the answers you seek. So if you want to describe the Super Bowl from last year, depending on how you frame that question, your answers will change, right? So if you are sports oriented, you're really interested in the football game, you're going to talk about the teams playing, the Panthers and the Broncos. You're going to think about those things. You might describe Peyton Manning's illustrious career or something like that if you're a big Peyton Manning fan. If you're more interested in the halftime show, you're going to spend your summary talking about Beyonce and maybe gloss over the other details. If you're interested in advertising or the commercials were funny to you, you might focus on those instead. So what is most important depends on the questions you're asking and what you're trying to figure out. Okay, and so it's important to really understand what your question is and what your focus is before you begin trying to summarize. Okay, so that's step one. Determine your focus. Why do you need to summarize this? What is your goal? Are you just summarizing it for a specific paper? Are you summarizing it to use later as a reference? Are you just thinking that maybe it will be useful down the road, and so you have this summary written out for future use? So think about the breadth of your focus here. If it's very specific for one paper, then you need to focus on the goals of that paper and how does that article support or enhance those goals. Okay, if it's more general than just how does this relate to things I'm interested in long term or more broadly. Okay, then of course you want to read the article. You want to take your time doing this. Don't sit down and try to read all 3 articles in an afternoon and think that you're going to have the greatest summaries that have ever existed and get a fantastic grade on the paper. So you really need to take your time and read the articles. I suggest scanning the article first. Most academic articles will have headings for you, so it'll be very easy to find research questions, discussions, findings, results, and things like that. So it should be pretty easy to find those things. So scan it first, get an idea of the structure of the article. Okay, and what's really important is to find the thesis or research questions. That's going to be right in the beginning for you. The idea with the beginning of a paper is to get you hooked and then give you the research question or the thesis and then begin to explain it. Okay, so try to find the thesis and research question. Everything in the paper should point back to that and support it or refute it or engage in discussion with the thesis statement or research question. So it's important that you know what that is as you begin reading. Then as you read, you want to do so interactively. So you want to continually ask your questions as you're reading and rereading. Okay, does this section relate and support the thesis? How so? Are there unanswered questions? If you find something that's not answered, mark it, indicate it. Okay, how are other academics talking about or addressing this thesis statement or question? And that should be discussed in there as well, but they might gloss over some things that don't seem as important to the author. Okay, so you want to be asking questions as you're reading and always thinking, why is this important to include? Why is this related, or how is this related to the thesis? And then as you go, take notes, highlight, and underline. You're going to be reading 3 articles for this one paper here, summary and analysis paper. So you want to be taking notes, highlighting, underlining, marking things that are important, and find a system that works best for you. I have a very specific system where I circle key terms, I put boxes around key actors, so whether that's an informant, other researchers, things like that. I put big quotation marks in the margins to indicate a solid quote, something that summarizes something very well, and things like that. Okay, so these are important to figure out on your own what the best method is for you, but writing helps you to learn. So if you're taking notes, that's usually very helpful. If you're taking notes, be sure to do so in your own words, or very clearly mark that something is a quote. You don't want to accidentally plagiarize. Keep in mind that plagiarism penalties in this course are extremely steep. You get a 0 on the assignment and you don't have the chance to redo that assignment. So if you're having trouble figuring out how to summarize without plagiarizing, let me know and we can work through that together, because the point is to help you learn, not to discourage you in the process. Perfect, there we go. So avoid the plagiarism, okay? If you find yourself sticking closely to the original language and only making minor changing in the wording, then you probably don't understand the study, okay? And that comes from the UConn Writing Center. So if you're sitting there and you're writing things down and you aren't able to translate it into a new wording or new phrasing or a new type of discussion, you probably don't understand it well enough to do so. So if you're really adhering to the exact phrasing or type of writing in the study, then you probably don't understand it well enough, and that's an indication that you need to go back and review a little more. Okay? When you're writing your summary, this is one way to do it. Of course, there are multiple ways, but this is what I find helpful and I think is helpful for students just beginning to learn this process. So you want to make an outline or a draft. Usually do it in the same order that the article is in. So state the questions of the article, the thesis, methods, results, implications of the results, discussions, conclusions, and outline things. If you're putting things in your own words, that's perfect. If you need to use a quote, make sure you clearly identify that that is a quote. Okay, and so this will help you kind of put things in order and get it out of the article and then onto your own sheet of paper. Okay, don't worry about the length to start, and by that I mean don't worry about writing too much. Don't worry about, is this detail necessary, and then not including it. It's much easier at the end to get rid of things than it is to add things back in. Okay, so always just write and write and write, and then as you edit, you can get rid of unimportant details. Okay. With your first edit, you want to look for completeness of ideas and accuracy as it relates to the article. And then on your second edit is when you'll start editing for quality, sentence structure, fluidity in your writing, things like that. Okay. So I love this quote, again from UConn Writing Center, that you should write to an unintelligent, intelligent, interested, naive, but slightly lazy audience. So people who know what they're doing, they're interested, but they don't really know about it, and they're kind of lazy, so they're not going to go figure it out on their own. So give the reader everything they need to understand, but don't condescend or placate to your reader, because they are intelligent. Okay, but make sure you're giving them all of the needed information. It's highly unlikely that when reading something and you don't know it, unless you're super motivated, you're not going to go look it up somewhere else. You're expecting it to all be in the article. And I'm sure some of you have been in that situation where you're reading and you're like thinking to yourself, well, I don't know what that means. But then you just keep reading and hopefully you figure it out instead of going and looking it up. So people reading your writing are going to respond the same way. So just know that as you're writing. And write for a naive and lazy audience. Things I need you to edit for. Wordiness. You don't need all of these extra words in there. Be direct. Just get straight to the point. That's much more difficult than adding in a bunch of unnecessary language. Okay, don't pad your paper with unnecessary language. It just detracts from the point you're making. And using specific language also shows confidence in what you're saying. When you get up on stage, let's say, for example, and you're very wishy-washy in what you're saying, it seems that you don't know what you're talking about. If you get straight to the point, you say exactly what you mean, and then you move on, it seems as if you're very confident in what you're saying and that you're saying it fully and correctly. I want you to look for appropriateness of language. Don't use slang unless it's important for your study. Don't add unnecessary language that doesn't fit the tone of the paper. This should be academic in nature, so you want to write with an academic language. I tend to avoid using personal pronouns, first person, so it can work, but it's much more difficult to make it feel very academic in nature. And so when you're writing about, I think this of the article, I thought it was difficult to read. What have you done with the focus? You've shifted the focus away from the article and you've shifted it toward yourself and the fact that you found it difficult to understand, not that it was difficult to understand because of X, Y, and Z. Okay, so always think about how you're shifting the focus either from yourself to the article or vice versa. Okay. Don't overuse quotations. This paper is relatively short. You should have 1 quotation, 2 maximum. Beyond that, I'm going to stop reading them and I'm just going to cross them out of your paper, and then you'll be left with whatever is left. Okay. Don't overuse quotes. You're summarizing. I can read the article for myself. I don't need you to quote it for me. Quotes should stop you in your tracks. They should be very tension-getting. Okay. They should grab you and make you pause. Okay. They shouldn't just be mundane things that you could reword yourself or say yourself. Make sure you're citing those correctly. You need page number, author, and you need to have a works cited section, obviously, at the end. Be succinct. So this just means things are briefly and clearly expressed. So no wandering, just tell me what it is, explain it, and be straight to the point. Okay. You should be writing about why, not what. This is the biggest issue I see students having. They start talking about what and not the why. And so taking a really easy example of Clifford the Big Red Dog and the Big Move, I think, or something is the title of the book. And so if you're expressing the what, you would say, in the book, the author says that Clifford doesn't want to leave his home. He wants to stay with his friends. Okay. If you're saying why, you might discuss instead and say, faced with the challenge of leaving his friends and his home that he'd grown to love, Clifford the Big Red Dog isolated himself from his friends, which detracted from his relationship and made it even harder to leave. Okay, so instead of saying the author wrote that Clifford didn't want to move, you explain why Clifford didn't want to move and how that affected him, okay, and then how he resolved that issue. Okay, so that's what you should be doing. I don't want to read your paper saying the author first talked about X, then they talked about Y, then they talked about Z. That's very boring and not helpful at all. Okay, so what you want to say is why they talked about those things. Why is that important? What does that mean? So don't tell me just what they did, but tell me why they did it and why it's important.